Czechoslovakia started the Velvet Revolution to break the barrier of the communist country and have a fresh start as a democratic government.
I was 13-year-old girl, and um, what I wanted to share with you is a kind of emotional experience, because I had mixed feelings back then. It was exciting, a little scary. We were at school helping, doing all the posters, and we were in the middle of it. I was just 13. I couldn't understand exactly what is happening, but I knew that it will have a big impact for the future.
Czechoslovakia started the Velvet Revolution to break the barrier of the communist country and have a fresh start as a democratic government. The Velvet Revolution all started when the people of Czechoslovakia did not like the communism anymore, and they wanted to be a democratic country. Communism from the Czechoslovakia people was a good thing and a bad thing. Everybody was controlled under the government. When the people of Czechoslovakia wanted to go on vacation or out of the country, they couldn't unless they had a special permission from the government, which meant they would have to be under good behavior before they left the country on vacation. And if they didn't come back, a person in their family would be punished. Barely anyone there was rich. Most people had the same amount of money because even if you were a doctor, you would get almost the same amount of payment as if you were working in a factory. Everybody who was in the Czechoslovakia had to have a job or they were thrown in jail. In 1988, in Czechoslovakia, also known as the Czechoslovakia Social Republic, it was getting a bit edgy. The leader of Czechoslovakia was its first secretary of the Communist Party. His name was Miloš Zekiáš. Miloš Zekiáš and the Communist Party were in control of Czechoslovakia. The quality of life in Czechoslovakia was slightly higher than the rest of Eastern Europe. Like television in Czechoslovakia was widely available, which like all other media was controlled by the government. This provided noticeable dividends so that people like Václav Havel from reaching the audience. None of this meant that the people didn't have any complaints. Many of the young had a great deal with the rules. Through 1988 and 1989, there were many demonstrations in Prague and Bratislava. This was mainly caused for reforms and didn't have anything to do with the revolution. The government did little to almost nothing about them. In fact, the communist government could see what was going on with the Eastern Bloc, and they made some superficial concessions to make it look like they were willing to reform. On the 17th of November in Prague, a student demonstration took place to commemorate a student who was killed by the Nazis 50 years back. The students started shooting at communist slogans, which led to the police hitting the students, and there was a rumor that one of the students was killed by one of the police. To many people, this was the last straw. Many people would start riots about how they did not like the communism on the streets. People would carry a candle and ask for peace. Right as some people were leaving, they could not because of how tight the space was. People were found lying on the ground that had fainted or were injured by the wild crowd. Some people were left on the ground bleeding for hours, some dead. The riots were so big they covered all the streets in the city, with barely any room for people to breathe. The small amount of people that were not a part of the riots could not go to work because of how the streets were crowded so much with people. Even if you wanted to go to your local store, you couldn't. Some people in the riots would sleep on the streets, and others built campgrounds to support the riot, and there were many strikes going on, such as people didn't go to work, and the protests led all the way to Prague, and it kept spreading. Almost all the people in the streets were protesting. The strikes spread, and so did the protests. At the time, the Soviet Union wanted nothing to do with this, so they let it be. On the 24th of November, all the communist parties resigned. Miloš Zekiáš was replaced by Pavel Ubernek, who was much more moderate communist. Most people were sick and tired of the communism. Karl Ubernek lasted for a whole 5 days. After several weeks of people discussing about what they should do with the economy, after a couple weeks they made a compromise government that was established. which at the first time since 1978 was majority non-communist, and then more democratic. They decided that Václav Havel was going to be the president on the 28th of December. Most people in Czechoslovakia were happy. After he was elected, he amnestiated all the prisoners who were in prison for having strong opinions against the government, which Czechoslovakia was a communist country, which meant all the people that had a strong bad opinion against the government when they were communists. But it didn't mean all prisoners were released, only the ones which were put in jail by having an opinion against the government. The people that did bad things like stealing or murder or things like that all stayed in prison. Now the process of full ending communism needed to wait till the new government gained more legitimacy, because people were still not sure about the government yet. This was done by elections in June 1990. Central elections helped Slovak Forum win, which rolled alongside to the Slovak equivalent public against violence. The separation of the anti-communist bloc into the Czechoslovakia parts indicates a brand new problem that Czechoslovakia has to deal with. There were surges of nationalism. It didn't mean that the nationalism could not be dealt with. Most of Czechoslovakia wanted to stay as a union and not to separate into two. Soon there were a new front runners, the Civic Democratic Party, led by Václav Klaus, and the movement of the Democratic Slovakia, led by Václav Mečiar. In the mid-1992, they both sat down, Klaus and Mečiar, and they discussed on what the new Czechoslovakia would look like. But they could not cooperate, and neither one of them was agreeing to anything. Even after sitting down at the table for a long time, they could not agree on what the Czechoslovakia would look like. Mečiar wanted to have their currency and autonomy for the Slovaks, but that was too much to ask for from the Czechs. Most of all, these demands from Mečiar were mainly his own speaking, that he came up from his own mind. The Slavic politicians would be very happy of just approving a union of equals. Mečiar made it very clear that the Czechs didn't really care. It was agreed that the Slovaks and Czechs would separate on the 1st of January 1993. So after the Czechs and Slovaks went their own way and split apart, it was soon called the Velvet Divorce.
Also, a little bit about communist country I would like to share with you, because this is something which not a lot of people know, the way how we lived when we were communist country. Um, Number one, we couldn't travel to different countries. We needed visa in order to travel. Number two, we couldn't open our own business. So if you would be one of these people, one of the dreamers, one of people who they would love to accomplish something in their life and they are driven, and you wouldn't be able to do that in communist country.
Ani v socialistické, ani v kapitalistické. Neexistuje to, aby 15letí děti určovali, kdy má odejít prezident nebo kdy má přijít a kdo jim má být. A to se bohužel stalo.
This song was very popular during the revolution because it talks all about war and about how we should have peace. It was also sung on November 17, 1989 during one of the protests.
Let it be this way. Clouds on the sky slowly go away. Now we must reap on that new song. This prayer of mine